The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of what would soon become the humble crumb, casting golden beams across the empty space where my dreams would either flourish or die. Dust particles danced in the light as I ran my fingers along the weathered countertop, imagining what it could become. Iris Lockhart, you've finally lost your mind, my brother's voice echoed in my memory, laced with that familiar mix of pity and condescension. A bakery? In this economy? With your background? I still remembered the eruption of laughter around my parents' dining table when I'd announced my resignation from Harrison and Bloom law firm to pursue my passion for baking. The sound had sliced through me like serrated knives, leaving wounds that still hadn't healed 3 months later. The bell above the door jingled, startling me from my thoughts. My realtor, Margot, swept in with her clipboard and wide smile. "Well, what do you think? Ready to sign your life away?" She laughed, but the joke felt too close to the truth. Every penny of my savings, my 401k, even the modest inheritance from my grandmother, all of it was about to be poured into these 4 walls. "It's perfect," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Absolutely perfect." 3 hours later, I stood alone in my bakery, key clutched in my hand so tightly the metal bit into my palm. The weight of what I'd done crashed over me in waves. I'd left a 6-figure salary at a prestigious law firm to sell muffins and coffee. My phone vibrated in my pocket. "Mom. The 3rd call today." I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she'd say. "Iris, darling, it's not too late to fix this little episode. Marcus said he'd put in a good word for you if you wanted to come back. Everyone has moments of crisis, sweetheart. But throwing away a Yale law degree to play Betty Crocker? That's not like you. Call me back." I slid down against the wall, knees pulled to my chest, and let myself cry. Just once. Just today. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And nobody, not my skeptical family, not my bewildered former colleagues, not even the doubtful voice in the back of my own mind, would stop me from making this dream a reality. 6 weeks later, I'd transformed the empty shell into something almost resembling a bakery cafe. The walls now gleamed a soft buttercream yellow, the countertops were new and polished, and the display cases waited expectantly for the pastries that would soon fill them. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of the test batches I'd been baking in the brand-new industrial ovens. My phone buzzed. My sister, Zoe. "You're still going through with this bakery thing?" she asked when I answered, not bothering with a greeting. "Hello to you too," I replied, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I piped rosettes onto my test cupcakes. "And yes, the humble crumb opens next week. Mom's worried about you. Mom's always worried about me. Dad says it's not too late to." "I'm not going back to corporate law, Zoe." The finality in my voice surprised even me. I spent 7 years being miserable because it's what everyone expected of me. I'm 32 years old. It's time I did something for myself. Selling cupcakes is doing something for yourself? The scoff in her voice made me wince. You graduated top of your class at Yale. You were on track to make partner. And I hated every minute of it. Everyone hates their job sometimes, Iris. That's why they call it work. I set down the piping bag, frustration bubbling inside me. Is there a reason you called, Zoe? Because I'm kind of busy here. A pause. Dad's birthday dinner is Sunday. Mom wanted me to remind you. Right. I'll be there. Don't be late. And maybe, dress nicely? Not covered in flour? I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. Glancing at my reflection in the shiny new espresso machine, I barely recognized myself. My usually sleek dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, a smudge of flour decorated my cheek, and for the first time in years, I wasn't wearing a carefully tailored suit. Instead, a simple t-shirt and jeans covered by an apron bearing the newly designed logo of the humble crumb. And despite my family's disapproval, despite the mountain of debt and uncertainty looming before me, I looked happy. Opening day arrived with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I'd been up since 3 a.m., baking batch after batch of pastries, brewing coffee, and battling the persistent voice of doubt that had taken up residence in my head. What if no one comes? What if they hate everything? What if my family was right all along? At exactly 7 a.m., I flipped the sign to open with shaking hands, said a silent prayer to whatever deity might be listening, and waited. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. A few curious passers-by wandered in, purchased coffee and the occasional muffin, but nothing like the steady stream of customers I'd need to keep the lights on. By noon, despair had settled heavy in my stomach. Then the door chimed, and in walked a harried-looking woman in hospital scrubs, dark circles under her eyes. "Are those cinnamon rolls fresh?" she asked, pointing to the display. "Baked this morning," I replied, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. She ordered two, along with the largest coffee I could provide. As I handed over her order, she took a bite of one roll and closed her eyes. "Oh my God," she moaned. "This is exactly what I needed after a double shift." The genuine pleasure on her face sent a warm flutter through my chest. "I'm Iris," I said, extending my hand. "Owner and baker." "Melody," she replied, shaking it. "ER nurse and apparently your newest fan. I'll be back tomorrow with reinforcements." True to her word, Melody returned the next day with 3 other nurses. The day after that, a young couple wandered in, followed by an elderly man who said he'd heard about my pecan sticky buns from his granddaughter. By the end of the first week, I had a small but steady stream of customers, enough to give me hope that this crazy dream might not be so crazy after all. Sunday evening found me rushing to change for my father's birthday dinner, flour still dusting my hair despite my best efforts to look presentable. I was 20 minutes late, which meant I was walking into the lion's den already at a disadvantage. My parents' house stood imposing and pristine as ever, a monument to their success and status. I parked my battered Honda next to Zoe's gleaming BMW and took a moment to steel myself before heading inside. "There she is." My father's booming voice greeted me as I entered. The bakery mogul herself. The dining room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. My mother, elegant as always in her pearls and cashmere. Zoe and her husband Richard, the perfect power couple in matching designer outfits. My brother Mason and his wife Elise, both successful physicians. And my father, the distinguished Judge William Lockhart, whose approval I'd spent a lifetime chasing. "Sorry I'm late," I said, setting the box containing his birthday cake on the table. The closing shift took longer than expected. The great entrepreneur, working retail hours, Mason quipped, raising his wine glass in mock salute. I bit my tongue, remembering my promise to myself not to let them get under my skin tonight. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart." His voice softened momentarily before he added, though I would have preferred having my daughter back at her rightful place in society rather than playing shopkeeper. "William," my mother warned, though whether she was admonishing him for the sentiment or merely the public expression of it, I couldn't tell. Dinner progressed with the usual polite interrogation. How was the bakery doing? Struggling but showing promise, though I only admitted the latter. Was I dating anyone? No time, which was true enough. Had I considered Marcus's offer to return to the firm? Not even for a second, though I phrased it more diplomatically. I just don't understand why you had to throw away your education, my mother said as she delicately cut into her roast. If you wanted a change, there are plenty of respectable options. Corporate counsel for a non-profit, perhaps. I didn't throw away anything, Mom. My education is still there. I'm just using different skills now. Skills you could have learned at a community college, Mason muttered. I set down my fork. What exactly is it that bothers you all so much about my choice? Is it that I'm not making six figures anymore? That I'm not wearing designer suits? Or is it that for once in my life, I'm doing something that makes me happy instead of trying to live up to the almighty Lockhart legacy? Silence fell across the table. My father cleared his throat. Iris, no one is saying you shouldn't be happy. We just worry that you've thrown away a promising career for a phase. A phase? I repeated incredulously. Dad, I'm 32 years old. And behaving like you're having a quarter-life crisis, Zoe chimed in. At least I'm not trapped in a loveless marriage for the sake of appearances, I shot back, immediately regretting the words as Zoe's face crumpled and Richard's jaw tightened. That's enough, my mother said sharply. This is your father's birthday celebration, not a forum for airing grievances. I stood up, napkin falling to the floor. You're right. I'm sorry. I think I should go. Iris, my father began, but I was already halfway to the door. Happy birthday, Dad. I hope you enjoy the cake. I made it myself. The drive home was a blur of tears and frustration. Why couldn't they see that I was finally doing something that brought me joy? Why wasn't that enough for them? As I pulled up to my small apartment above the bakery, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. That was uncalled for. I stared at the screen before typing back, "You're right. I'm sorry about what I said. But I'm not sorry about my choices." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. We just want what's best for you. I sighed, typing, then trust that I know what that is better than anyone else. No response came. The following morning, I threw myself into work with renewed determination. If my family couldn't believe in me, I'd just have to succeed so spectacularly they'd be forced to acknowledge I'd made the right choice. 2 months after opening, the humble crumb had developed a small but loyal following. The morning rush of hospital staff from nearby St. Vincent's sustained me through the early hours, while a growing lunch crowd kept the afternoon from being a total wash. It wasn't enough to make a profit yet, but it was enough to keep the lights on and the ingredients stocked. I was experimenting with a new lemon tart recipe when the bell jingled, announcing a customer. Looking up, I froze at the sight of Elise, my brother's wife, standing awkwardly by the door. "Elise," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "This is unexpected." She approached the counter, looking around with undisguised curiosity. "So this is the famous bakery." "Infamous, more like," I replied with a wry smile. "It's cute," she admitted, examining the display case. "Oh, are those the cinnamon rolls Melody won't shut up about?" "Melody? You know Melody?" "We work in the same hospital. Different departments, but we occasionally cross paths in the cafeteria." Elise pointed to a raspberry Danish. "I'll take one of those and a coffee, please." As I prepared her order, an uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Elise and I had never been close. She'd married into the family after I'd already moved away for law school, and our interactions were limited to holiday gatherings and the occasional family event. "So," I said, sliding her coffee across the counter, What brings you to this part of town? Consultation with a patient, she said, taking a sip. But also, curiosity, I suppose. Mason talks about your baking experiment constantly. I'll bet he does, I muttered. He's worried about you, you know. They all are. I sighed. They have a funny way of showing it. The Lockharts aren't exactly known for their emotional intelligence, Elise said with a small smile. She took a bite of the Danish and her eyes widened. Oh my God. This is amazing. Thank you, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. No, seriously. I was prepared to lie to spare your feelings, but this is legitimately delicious. I laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd had in days. I appreciate both your honesty and your willingness to spare my feelings. Elise finished her pastry in thoughtful silence. You know, she said finally, I never understood why you left the law firm. It seemed so impulsive. It wasn't, I said quietly. I'd been thinking about it for years. I just never had the courage to do it until your panic attack in the middle of the Henderson deposition, Elise finished. At my startled look, she shrugged. Mason told me. Of course he did. I busied myself wiping down the counter. It wasn't just the panic attack. It was everything. I was working 80-hour weeks, hadn't been on a date in 3 years, and the only thing I looked forward to was stress baking on the weekends. And now? I gestured around the small, sunlit space. Now I work 90-hour weeks, still haven't been on a date, and I'm perpetually covered in flour. But the difference is, I don't dread getting up in the morning anymore. Elise studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I get it. More than you might think. You do? My parents wanted me to be a surgeon, not a pediatrician. Said I was wasting my talent on runny noses and ear infections. I had no idea. She shrugged. It's not something I advertise, especially around your family. The Lockharts aren't big on compromise. The bell jingled again, announcing new customers. Elise gathered her things. I should get back. But, Iris? For what it's worth, I think you're braver than any of them give you credit for. The unexpected alliance with Elise marked a turning point. The next week, she returned with a couple of colleagues from pediatrics. The week after that, she brought Mason, who grudgingly admitted that my chocolate croissants were not terrible. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. 3 months in, I hired my first employee, Lily, a college student with a passion for coffee artistry. Her elaborate latte designs became an Instagram sensation, bringing in a new wave of younger customers eager to photograph their aesthetic beverages alongside my pastries. 6 months after opening, the humble crumb had not only survived but begun to thrive. The cramped space was often standing room only during peak hours, and I'd had to expand my menu to include heartier lunch options to accommodate demand. One unusually quiet afternoon, I was adjusting the recipe for my bacon and Gruyere quiche when the door opened, bringing in a gust of autumn air and a familiar face I hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. Marcus, I said, nearly dropping the measuring cup in my hand. Marcus Chen, senior partner at Harrison and Bloom and the man who'd mentored me through law school and my early career, stood before me, as impeccably dressed as ever in his tailored suit. Hello, Iris, he said, his familiar voice sending me back to late nights preparing briefs and early morning court appearances. This is quite a change from the 38th floor, isn't it? I straightened, suddenly conscious of my flour-dusted appearance and messy bun. What can I get for you? He approached the counter, surveying the offerings with the same analytical eye he once used to dissect legal arguments. Your mother says I must try the lemon tart. My mother? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Since when does my mother recommend my baking? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She might be more supportive than you think. He pointed to the tart. I'll take one of those, and whatever coffee you recommend. As I prepared his order, Marcus glanced around the bakery, taking in the handwritten chalkboard menu, the mismatched vintage tables and chairs, and the wall of photographs featuring regular customers with their favorite treats. This is quite the operation you've built, he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. It's small, but it's mine, I replied, handing him his coffee. That's worth something. He took a bite of the tart and nodded appreciatively. Impressive. Though I shouldn't be surprised. Your stress baking got us through many a late-night prep session. The memory of bringing homemade cookies to the office during particularly grueling cases brought an unexpected smile to my face. Those were the days. Indeed. Marcus sipped his coffee, studying me over the rim of the cup. You seem different. Happier? I suggested. I was going to say at peace, but yes, that too. We lapsed into comfortable silence for a moment before he cleared his throat. The reason I'm here, Iris. We're preparing for the Westbrook merger. It's going to be contentious, and we need someone with your expertise in corporate restructuring. I stiffened. Marcus. He held up a hand. Before you refuse, hear me out. This would be a consulting position. 6 weeks, max. You'd set your own hours, work remotely as much as possible. I have a bakery to run. And a brilliant legal mind gathering dust while you pipe frosting. At my expression, he softened his tone. I'm not asking you to come back permanently, Iris. Just to help us through this one case. For old time's sake. I hesitated, torn between my instinctive refusal and the small part of me that missed the intellectual challenge of complex legal work. I'll think about it, I said finally. Marcus nodded, satisfied. That's all I ask. He finished his tart, brushing crumbs from his suit. Though I must say, if you ever decide to return to law, you'd be giving up a promising career in the culinary arts. After he left, I found myself pondering his offer. 6 weeks. Good money, money that could help expand the bakery, maybe even fund the small batch ice cream maker I'd been eyeing. And if I was honest with myself, a part of me missed the cerebral challenge of untangling complex legal knots. That evening, I called Zoe for the first time since our tense exchange after Dad's birthday. I need advice, I said without preamble when she answered. For me? She sounded genuinely surprised. This is new. Marcus came to see me today. He wants me to consult on the Westbrook merger. Silence stretched between us. And you're considering it? I am. Why? I thought you were done with the legal world. I sighed, sinking onto my couch. It's complicated. The bakery is doing well, but this kind of money could really help me expand. And it's only for 6 weeks. But I'm afraid if I put one foot back in that world, I'll get sucked in again. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Can I be honest with you? When have you ever not been? Fair point. She chuckled. Iris, I think you're afraid of proving us right. That this bakery thing was just a phase, and you'll eventually come crawling back to the firm. Her insight hit uncomfortably close to home. Maybe. But here's the thing, taking on a short-term consulting gig doesn't invalidate your choice. It just means you're pragmatic enough to use all your skills to support your dream. I blinked, surprised by her words. That's surprisingly supportive. Don't sound so shocked. I can be supportive. Since when? Since I saw you at Dad's birthday dinner. Her voice softened. You looked different, Iris. Tired, sure, but there was something else. A spark that I haven't seen in years. You laughed at me when I announced I was opening a bakery, I reminded her. I was wrong, she admitted, the words clearly difficult for her. We all were. You were drowning at the firm, and none of us could see it because we were too busy protecting the precious Lockhart legacy. The honesty in her voice left me momentarily speechless. Who are you, and what have you done with my sister? Very funny. I could hear the eye roll in her voice. Look, take the consulting gig. Use the money for your bakery. Prove to yourself, not to us, that you can succeed on your own terms. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, turning over Zoe's advice in my mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could do both, embrace my legal skills when it suited me, while continuing to build my new life. The next morning, I called Marcus and accepted the position. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Mornings at the bakery, afternoons buried in merger documents, evenings testing new recipes while annotating legal briefs. I hired another employee, Rico, a culinary school graduate with a flair for savory pastries, to help cover the hours I spent consulting. The work was challenging but satisfying, and for the first time, I found myself appreciating my legal training without feeling suffocated by it. I was using my expertise on my terms, for a finite period, to support my true passion. You're working yourself into the ground, Lily commented one morning as I stifled my third yawn in 10 minutes. I'm fine, I insisted, reaching for my fourth cup of coffee. You look like you haven't slept in days. That's because I haven't, I admitted. The Westbrook negotiations are at a critical stage. And the bakery expansion? I rubbed my eyes. The contractor says we can start next week. Thanks to the consulting fee from Marcus, I'd been able to secure the vacant space next door to expand the humble crumb into a proper cafe with more seating and an expanded kitchen. The timing wasn't ideal, with the merger negotiations coming to a head, but opportunities like this didn't come along often in the competitive commercial real estate market. You need help, Lily declared. Professional help. I do not need therapy just because I'm a little tired. Not that kind of help, she interrupted, rolling her eyes. Business help. Like a manager or something. I paused, considering her words. I can't afford to hire a manager. Then delegate more. Let Rico handle the morning baking so you can sleep in occasionally. Let me take over the ordering and inventory. But nothing, she said firmly. You're going to crash and burn if you keep this up, and then where will we all be? I stared at her, taken aback by her vehemence. When did you get so bossy? I asked with a small smile. When my boss became too stubborn to take care of herself. She softened her tone. We all love this place, Iris. We want to see it succeed. But not at the expense of your health. The sincerity in her voice touched me more than I cared to admit. I'll think about it. Do more than think, she urged. Actually do it. That evening, instead of diving straight into merger documents, I took a step back and evaluated my situation. Lily was right, I was stretching myself too thin, trying to be everywhere and do everything at once. I called Rico and offered him the position of head baker. His excitement was palpable, and his eagerness to take on more responsibility left me wondering why I'd hesitated to delegate in the first place. Next, I promoted Lily to assistant manager, giving her authority over scheduling and inventory. She accepted with a knowing "I told you so" smirk that made me laugh despite my exhaustion. The relief was immediate and profound. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without waking up in a panic about forgotten orders or overlooked clauses. The Westbrook merger concluded successfully, with Marcus hinting at future consulting opportunities if I was interested. The expansion of the Humble Crumb proceeded smoothly, and soon we were able to accommodate twice as many customers in a space that felt warm and welcoming rather than cramped. 9 months after opening, the Humble Crumb was featured in a local magazine as one of the city's hidden gems. The morning after the article was published, a line stretched down the block before we even opened. "This is insane," Rico muttered as we frantically prepared for the morning rush. "We're going to sell out in the first hour. Then we'll make more," I said, determined not to be overwhelmed by success after fighting so hard for it. By noon, we'd sold out of nearly everything, and I'd been forced to make 3 emergency supply runs. By closing time, I was exhausted but elated. The bell jingled as I was wiping down the last table, and I looked up to see my father standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Dad," I said, straightening in surprise. "We're actually closed." "I know," he interrupted. "I was hoping to speak with you privately." I gestured to a clean table. "Would you like some coffee? I think there's still some in the pot." "That would be nice." As I prepared 2 cups, my father glanced around the cafe, taking in the whimsical decor, the chalkboard wall covered in customer comments, and the framed copy of the magazine article. "This is quite impressive," he said as I set his coffee before him. "Thank you," I replied, waiting for the but that inevitably followed any compliment from William Lockhart. It didn't come. Instead, he took a sip of coffee and said, "Marcus speaks very highly of your work on the Westbrook merger." "It was a good opportunity," I said cautiously, unsure where this was heading. "He says you haven't lost your edge. That you're still one of the sharpest legal minds he's seen." I tensed, preparing for the lecture about wasting my potential. "Which makes it all the more remarkable that you've built this," my father continued, surprising me. "A successful business from scratch, in an industry you had no formal training in." I stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I was wrong, Iris." The words, spoken quietly but clearly, hung in the air between us. "I was wrong to dismiss your dream. Wrong to prioritize the Lockhart legacy over your happiness." I sat back, stunned into silence. "When you left the firm, I thought you were making a terrible mistake," he continued. "I couldn't understand how my brilliant daughter could throw away a promising career for this." He gestured around the cafe. "But I see it now. You weren't running away from something. You were running towards something." Tears pricked at my eyes. "Dad. Let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "I've never been good at apologizing. Just ask your mother." He smiled ruefully. "But I am sorry, Iris. For not supporting you. For making you feel like you had to choose between your dreams and your family." I blinked rapidly, trying to process this unexpected apology from a man who'd never admitted to being wrong in his life. "What changed?" I managed to ask. "Besides seeing my daughter happier than she's been in years?" He shrugged. "Marcus made some compelling points. As did Elise. And surprisingly, Zoe." "Zoe defended me?" "Quite vigorously, in fact." He smiled slightly. she said, and I quote, "Dad, if you could pull that stick out of your ass for 5 minutes, you'd see that Iris is doing exactly what you've always preached about, following her convictions." I laughed, picturing Zoe confronting our father with her usual bluntness. "And she was right," he admitted. "You followed your convictions, even when it meant standing alone. That takes courage." His voice softened. "Courage I'm not sure I would have had in your position." The admission, so unlike my usually stoic father, left me speechless. "Anyway," he said, clearing his throat, "I came to ask if you're free for dinner on Sunday. Your mother and I would like to discuss investment opportunities." "Investment opportunities? You're expanding, aren't you?" "I saw the construction next door." "Yes, but every successful business needs capital to grow," he said matter-of-factly. "And every parent wants to support their child's dreams, even if it took this particular parent an embarrassingly long time to realize that." Tears spilled freely now, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'd like that, Dad." As he rose to leave, he paused. "One more thing. Mason's been talking about leaving his practice to open a wellness clinic for underserved communities. I'd appreciate if you wouldn't mention I told you. He's going to need all the support he can get when he makes his announcement." I smiled, understanding the olive branch he was offering. "My lips are sealed." After he left, I sat alone in my cafe, overwhelmed by the day's events. From the line of customers eager to try my creations to my father's unexpected apology and offer of support, it felt like I'd crossed some invisible threshold. The humble crumb was no longer just a dream or a rebellion. It was a success, on my terms, built with my own hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Did Dad stop by?" "Yes. Thank you for defending me to him." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, before she finally replied, "Someone had to knock some sense into him. Besides, I was getting tired of pretending your lemon tarts aren't the best thing I've ever tasted." I laughed out loud. "You've been eating my tarts?" "Elise brings them home after her hospital shifts. I may have stolen a few." "Thief. Guilty as charged. Save me a raspberry Danish for Sunday dinner?" "Done." I locked up the cafe and climbed the stairs to my apartment, exhausted but content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more customers, expansion plans, perhaps even investors, but for now, I allowed myself to savor the victory. Not just the success of the humble crumb, but the harder-won victory of staying true to myself in the face of doubt and disapproval. 1 year after opening, the humble crumb had expanded into the space next door, doubling its seating capacity and adding a small private event area that was booked solid for months in advance. My staff had grown to 7, including a full-time manager who allowed me to focus on recipe development and strategic growth. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up from the dessert I was plating to see Mason enter, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the bustling cafe. "Brave of you to come during the lunch rush," I teased, sliding the dessert to a waiting server. "I need advice," he said without preamble, his usual confidence noticeably absent. I raised an eyebrow. "For me? That's new. Don't gloat. It's unbecoming." "I'm not gloating," I protested, though I couldn't quite suppress a smile. "Just surprised." "What kind of advice?" He glanced around the crowded cafe, clearly reluctant to speak in such a public space. "Come on," I said, gesturing toward the back. "We can talk in my office." We wound our way through the kitchen, where Rico was instructing a new hire on the finer points of proofing dough, and into the small room I'd claimed as a combination office and experimental baking lab. "So," I said, perching on the edge of my desk, What can the humble bakery owner do for the esteemed Dr. Lockhart? Mason ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen since we were children. I'm thinking of leaving the practice. To open a wellness clinic, I finished. At his startled look, I smiled apologetically. Dad might have mentioned it. Dad knows? Oh God. He sank into a chair, looking vaguely ill. He's going to disown me. Actually, I think he's coming around to the idea that his children might have dreams that don't align perfectly with the Lockhart master plan. Mason looked skeptical. This is the same man who insisted I take Latin in high school because it would look good on my medical school applications? The same man who color-coded my study schedule for the MCAT? The very same, I confirmed. People can change, Mason. Even stubborn, tradition-bound people like Dad. Says the woman who had to open a bakery and become a local success story before he'd admit he was wrong. I shrugged. I may have paved the way, but the path exists now. And for what it's worth, I think a wellness clinic for underserved communities sounds like a wonderful idea. You do? Of course. It's meaningful work that plays to your strengths while addressing a real need. What's not to support? He studied me for a moment, then shook his head with a rueful smile. When did you become the wise one in the family? Around the time I stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted and started being myself, I replied, surprised by my own insight. We talked for another hour, discussing logistics, financing options, and the inevitable family drama that would accompany his announcement. By the time he left, Mason looked lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden of his dreams had made them more tangible, more possible. The following Sunday, my family gathered at my parents' house, the tension palpable as Mason stood to make his announcement. The shock on my mother's face, the momentary tightening of my father's jaw, the calculating gleam in Zoe's eyes, all exactly as I'd expected. But what followed wasn't. Instead of dismissal or lecture, my father raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, his eyes moving from Mason to me. And to the courage it takes to pursue them. As conversations flowed around me, Mason detailing his clinic plans, Elise discussing potential partnerships with pediatric outreach programs, Zoe surprisingly supportive despite her initial skepticism, I caught my mother watching me with an unreadable expression. You started something, you know, she said quietly when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. This revolution. I just opened a bakery, Mom, I protested. You did more than that. She touched my cheek gently. You showed us all that the Lockhart legacy could be about more than just prestige and tradition. It could be about passion and purpose too. 2 years after that fateful day when I'd signed the lease on an empty storefront, the humble crumb had become not just my livelihood but the heart of a community. The morning hospital staff, the lunch crowd of local office workers, the families who gathered for weekend brunch, all had become part of something larger than I could have imagined. And my family, once so certain of the path I should follow, now lined up outside my door like everyone else, though they still insisted on family discounts. Some dreams, it turns out, are worth the leap of faith. Even when, especially when, everyone else is laughing.